Excuse me, we haven't done this in a little while. Good morning. Welcome to this hearing this morning. The Environmental Protection Agency, library closures, better access for a broader audience, question mark. The EPA has built an absolutely unique library system. It contains collections of documents that are very specialized and are used to inform scientific advice, regulatory proposals, and enforcement of environmental laws. With 26 branches around the country, the network, as it stood in the beginning of 2006, was an integrated whole with regions possessing collections appropriate to those regions, as well as a general collection of journals and books. By the end of that year, however, the system was in disarray. EPA headquarters had imposed an 80% budget cut on the regional library system, which resulted in the closings of the Chicago, Dallas, and Kansas City libraries, and closed both the headquarters library and the chemistry library in Washington. The materials of those libraries were boxed, stored, shipped, given away, and in some cases apparently just thrown away. Members of the public, EPA employees, members of Congress were all concerned about the way the library closings developed. Congress had no real warning that it was coming. Did the employees or the public rely upon the EPA's library system? Our full committee chairman, Mr. Gordon, joined in a GAO request, a Government Accountability Office request, with Chairman Dingell and Chairman Waxman, as well as Senator Boxer, and gave the GAO the task of examining the methods used by the EPA for closing the libraries. We will hear the testimony of the GAO today, but their findings confirm that our concerns about the library closings were very well founded. EPA managers had quietly begun considering how to consolidate the libraries and modernize their libraries in 2003. They gave it a lot of thought. They developed a thoughtful plan to avoid hobbling the EPA's work or the public's access, to develop a continuous availability of the information with minimum disruption. But then when it came time to consolidate the system, those managers, EPA managers, just ignored all of that careful planning and simply shut the libraries, or told the libraries, your budget is now 20% of what it was before, deal with it. There was no effort to reach out to the staff to learn what they needed from the libraries and how to serve the EPA employees' continued work. That the EPA managers did not try to establish priorities in library holdings or to digitize those holdings before boxing them up so that they would remain continuously available to the EPA and to the public. They made no effort to do a cost-benefit analysis of various ways to organize the library system. When it came decisions to close, and it came to decisions to close libraries, EPA headquarters made no effort to provide guidance or assure integration within the system. Again, headquarters simply announced a $2 million cut, leaving $500,000, $500,000 across the regional system, and just told the regions to figure it out. Your budget is 20% of what it was before, deal with it. Perhaps it's not surprising that the library system was as disrupted as it has been, that libraries have closed. What is pretty remarkable is the effort of EPA's employees to keep the libraries open, even if they have had to reduce hours and access. The most generous interpretation of EPA's conduct in closing the libraries is incompetence, that EPA managers grossly mismanaged the library system. Despite careful thinking and planning, in the end, incompetence seems to have ruled the manner in which the EPA budget cuts were administered. Others see a more sinister motive, because it is undoubtedly the case that closing libraries and limiting access to important information reduces the ability of EPA employees to protect the environment or the public health. certainly hobbles the work also of independent scientists who had relied upon the libraries. I am not persuaded that there was actually a conscious motive behind those actions of hobbling the work of the EPA and of independent scientists, but it is an unavoidable and absolutely predictable consequence of what management did in 2006. And there is a well-known legal doctrine that you are held to have intended the natural consequences of your conduct, of your actions. EPA managers took a library system that was working well, that was the best in the world at what they did, that they knew was important to what EPA did, that they knew was important to independent scientists, and they disrupted it so much that it will take years and a lot of money to make things right, and some things will never be made right. So where do we go from here? First, Congress directed in the 2008 omnibus appropriation that the regional libraries that have been closed should be reopened. I congratulate Senator Boxer for her strong work to make that happen. I want to know what EPA is doing to follow that direction from Congress. Second, the agency should reopen its headquarters and chemical libraries. Those are central assets that serve the Washington staff of EPA, and the loss of those libraries is a tragedy. Third, EPA managers need to return to the studies of 2004 and 2005 for how to consolidate and manage and modernize the libraries. There should certainly be no further closings until the holdings of the libraries have been effectively cataloged, evaluated, ranked in priority order, and digitized. No library should be closed without a promise. Should be closed with a promise of eventual internet or intranet access until the search engines that would make it happen are proven to provide the access that's promised. No library should be closed until methods are established to guarantee librarian support for the work of the libraries, even and for the EPA and for the scientists who depend upon those libraries, even if that work is done with virtual materials. Finally, no effort to restructure services should come without significant consultation and guidance from the staff of the agency, the concerned public, the scientists who depend upon those libraries, and with Congress. We are right in the Constitution, right there, just before Article 2, Article 1. We are not meddling. We are part of the government. We have an excellent panel of witnesses with us this morning. I look forward to their testimony, your testimony, and your recommendations on how to rebuild and modernize the EPA's network. Now I would like to recognize Mr. Hall, who is filling in today for Mr. Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin. Mr. Hall, would you like to make an opening statement?
I wouldn't like to, but I'm going to. With that opening statement from one of the renowned lawyers who came to Congress with the reputation of being one of the really great lawyers in the whole area that he represented, he's kind of a hard guy to take on, and I'm not taking him on. I'm not here to push nor to pull. I'm here really to be a member sitting here to where we can get this committee to going. And you do have a good panel. I know some of them and known them for some time. But I've listened to you there, very capable output. I thought about Tom Connolly, a judge, longtime judge, later in the Senate. He was about to sentence a man to death, and he reiterated all of the hard crimes he'd done and how horrible and heinous it all was, and said, "Now, do you have anything to say before I sentence you to die?" And he said, "No, sir, the way you put it seemed like I'm getting all pretty light." So I don't know if that's the way this group feels or not. But, Mr. Chairman, I don't have an opening statement. I'd like to ask unanimous consent for Mr. Sensenbrenner to put a statement in the record without objection. And I'd like to have the right to let Judge Brown, Dr. Brown, have my time, and I understand he just wants to put one in the record.
Also without objection.
I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing, and yes, likewise, I'm looking forward to the testimony of the panel, and I also will just submit my opening statement for the record, if that's agreeable with Chairman, if I ask unanimous consent to be able to do so.
Again, without objection.
Sir.
And if there are any members of the committee, of the subcommittee, who are not here this morning, we will also welcome statements that they may submit. So all that without objection is so ordered. I believe that you may. Yes, Mr. Hall. And Mr. Hall, if I ever return to the practice of law, I assume that I can use some of part of what you said today in my promotional materials. All right, I believe that we have 4 photographs to show before we begin the testimony. First photograph shows a sign that now greets library visitors at EPA headquarters. As of October 1, 2006, the EPA headquarters library space is closed. The second photo shows a sign that greeted visitors at the Chicago Library. This USA EPA Region 5 library is permanently closed. The third photo, which was taken by our committee staff, shows boxes of materials at the headquarters library. The final photograph shows empty shelves, again at headquarters. Those shelves, we assume, used to be full of the documents that EPA employees and independent scientists relied upon to do their work. Those photographs, as well as others taken by the committee staff or provided the committee, will also appear in the record. So with that, I want to introduce our witnesses. It's my pleasure to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. John Stephenson, the Director of the Natural Resources and Environment Division at the Government Accountability Office. Mr. Charles Orzehoskie, right, is the President of the American Federation of Government Employees Council 238, AFGE. Dr. Francesca Grifo is a Senior Scientist and Director of the Science Integrity Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Mr. Jim Rettig is the President of the American Library Association. And our final witness is Ms. Molly O'Neill, Assistant Administrator for the Office of Environmental Information and Chief Information Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome to all our witnesses. You will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. You have, I think, all submitted written testimony, which will be included in the record of the hearing. When you all end your questions, your testimony will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. My intention to keep this hearing moving at a brisk pace. It looks like the usual sources of disruption will not be the problem. They are sometimes, so we should be able to do that. We will almost certainly be interrupted by votes. I say we, it may just be me. I want to encourage all of my colleagues who may be watching this on the House Internet system to get back as quickly as possible if they intend to attend any part of the meeting, so we can continue our business as rapidly as possible. It is our practice to take testimony under oath. This is an Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee. Do any of you have any objection to swearing an oath? Okay. You also have the right to be represented by counsel. Is anyone here represented by counsel at today's hearings? We ask you these questions to put you at ease. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Mr. Stephenson, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our report being released today on EPA's library restructuring. We conducted our review, as you've already mentioned, at the request of the full Science and Technology Committee, as well as the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. The EPA's library network provides access to critical environmental information that the agency needs to promote environmental awareness, conduct research, enforce environmental laws, make policy decisions, and fulfill its mission of protecting human health and the environment. The library network also provides information and services to state environmental agencies, local community organizations, and the general public. Before the reorganization, the network included 26 libraries, some at EPA headquarters, but most at its 10 regional offices, research centers, and laboratories around the country. In summary, as you have in our report, we found that in late 2006, EPA embarked on an effort to restructure its library network by closing physical access to one headquarters and 3 regional office libraries and reducing or changing operations at 6 others. In a separate move, it also closed its headquarters-based chemical library containing vast information on hazardous chemicals and pesticides. Furthermore, some of the libraries began to digitize, disperse, and dispose of books, research studies, and other materials without a common set of agency-wide guidance for doing so. EPA's approach created the risk that not only would library services not be improved, but they may actually be degraded. While exploring ways to restructure and make library operations more efficient is always a good idea, it should not be done haphazardly. Certainly you don't close libraries, get rid of staff, and dispose of materials first, and then figure out what to do later. But it seems that that's exactly what happened here. EPA began restructuring its libraries without conducting several analyses that you would typically expect to see to adequately justify, plan, and implement such an important endeavor. For example, it did not fully survey EPA staff and other users to characterize their needs. It did not fully inventory its vast holdings to determine what it had and how it should be handled. It did not develop or analyze business, organizational, or technical models for improving service. It did not develop new policy and procedures to guide the library reorganization, nor did it do a basic cost-benefit analysis that OMB generally recommends for agency decisions such as this. According to EPA officials, it decided to proceed without completing such analysis, many of which were recommended, as you mentioned, in its own 2004 library study, to create $2 million in savings needed to contribute to the overall EPA reduction in the President's fiscal year 2007 budget proposal. Interestingly, EPA's regional managers usually have discretion as to how to absorb budget reductions such as this, but in fiscal year 2007, they agreed that the reduction would come from the libraries. As of today, EPA has still not developed an effective strategy or plan to ensure the continuity of library services. EPA's 2007 plan describes library reorganization as a phased approach, but it does not provide specific goals, timelines, or feedback mechanisms to measure performance and monitor user needs to ensure a successful reorganization while maintaining quality services. Moreover, library collections and services formerly provided by the closed libraries will now be provided on a fee-for-service basis by other libraries in the network, and some materials will be digitized and made available online, but EPA has yet to estimate what these activities will cost or where the funds will come from. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, our report contains recommendations to the EPA administrator to continue the moratorium on further changes to the library network until the agency, 1, develops a comprehensive plan to justify and guide the implementation of its reorganization, 2, institutes an outreach process to ensure that the views of all stakeholders affected by the reorganization are considered, 3, creates mechanisms to ensure sufficient oversight to control the library reorganization and to monitor the impact on EPA staff and other users, and 4, implements procedures to ensure library materials are appropriately handled. EPA agreed with the recommendations on our report, but now it needs to take the next step and implement them. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the summary of my statement, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Stephenson. Mr. Orzehoskie.
Good morning. I would like to thank Chairman Miller, Congressman Sensenbrenner, and members of the Subcommittee on Investigation and Oversight for this opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Charles Orzehoskie. I'm President AFGE Council 238, and I've worked for EPA for over 37 years, more than 20 of those years as a supervisor. I hold an engineering degree from Illinois Institute of Technology and a law degree from DePaul University in Chicago. Our organization, AFG Council 238, represents almost 9,000 employees of EPA and 11 locals throughout the country, and we strive to improve the working conditions and agency efficiency. For EPA to carry out our mission requires a deep understanding of environmental science, and EPA engineers and scientists have historically utilized EPA libraries and library staff to assist them in that effort. Sadly, EPA library services are no longer available to staff or to general public at 2 headquarters libraries and 3 regional offices. Yet, on February 6, 2007, EPA Administrator Stephen L. Johnson testified before the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee stating, "We discontinued walk-in service at 5 of our 26 libraries and reduced the hours of operation at other libraries. However, the services provided remain unchanged." Council 238 does not understand Administrator Johnson's statement. For example, he must not have visited Chicago recently because the space where the library was located is vacant. Even the furniture has been sold. How have the services provided remained unchanged, particularly for any person who does not receive EPA messages explaining the new library procedures? Administrator Johnson further testified EPA saw a decline in the walk-in traffic at many of our libraries, implying the public's demand for information had decreased. The decline in walk-in traffic may be due in part to increased security measures at federal buildings since 9/11 and EPA budget reductions and public outreach programs. But the public's interest in environmental issues remains strong. At the same hearing, Leslie Berger, President of the American Library Association, testified, "Is EPA library plan based on end users' needs? Apparently not." The council tried to work with EPA on this issue, but we were stonewalled. Management was apparently not interested in the agency's engineers and scientists had to say about EPA libraries. Unfortunately, so many of this administrator's decisions appear to be based on the President's management agenda, PMA, and not on the mandate of Congress, the will of the American people, or what would be best for accomplishing EPA's mission. We have many concerns about closing libraries. Let me just summarize that common sense suggests that to make sound scientific decisions, data and information are at the heart of a good process, and closing libraries at this time appears to work counter to that objective. We have been told that the libraries were closed to save the government money, yet this doesn't make sense. EPA's own Office of Environmental Information did a cost-benefit analysis in 2004, which estimated that EPA's library network saved agency professional staff 214,000 hours, a cost saving of approximately $7.5 million. The benefit-to-cost ratio was conservatively estimated at 4.4 to 1. EPA management has stated that closing the libraries was also an act of modernization. Hopefully, at some time in the future, we will see positive results of modernization. However, wouldn't it have made sense to have piloted the project, tested how well digitization worked, and only then consider whether there was a need for redundancy of hard copies? More should have been done before declaring mission accomplished, turning off the lights, locking the doors, and tossing out documents. When AFGE Council 238 first raised the issue of libraries, EPA rebuffed the council, saying the union's request for input was premature. In March of 2006, after EPA Region 5 announced the regional library would close, we issued a demand to bargain over the libraries, thinking the issue was now ripe for negotiations. However, management again refused to bargain and instead went ahead and dismantled EPA libraries. On August 16, 2006, Council 238 filed a grievance against EPA for failure to negotiate, followed by Council 238 invoking arbitration over the grievance after the agency declined to settle. Still, the agency refused to bargain. On February 5, 2007, we filed with the Federal Labor Relations Authority for the agency's failure to pick an arbitrator. FLRA Judge A. Pearson ordered the agency to cease and desist from failing or refusing to proceed to arbitration or interfering with its employees and their rights to exercise their rights assured by the Federal Service Labor Management Relations Statute. Then on September 25, 2007, an arbitration was heard, and arbitrator George E. Larney's opinion was issued last month. The opinion found that the agency had violated applicable provisions of the union contract when it acted to forestall and preclude engaging the council in bargaining. The arbitrator ruled it to sustain the grievance and ordered the agency to engage the council in bargaining. Arbitrator Larney stated in his finding, evidence reveals that the agency stonewalled the union with regard to negotiations, let alone allowing the union a real and viable role in library reorganization process. Arbitrator Larney went on to state, if the agency's conduct was not bad enough, the agency compounded the error of its ways by closing libraries unilaterally without the benefit of legitimate union input. EPA's report to Congress on reopening libraries is due later this month. Yet EPA, even after Larney's ruling, has failed to meet with the Council to negotiate any aspect of library closing. This type of behavior where EPA ignores the rights of its employees must stop. In conclusion, the EPA should depend on an impartial research and science to make informed decisions, and a first-class EPA library can help with those decisions. Council 238 would like to see the libraries reopened and restored by the end of this fiscal year. And we thank Congress for providing $1 million in the fiscal year 2008 budget to reopen libraries. However, we are concerned that the funding may be insufficient to get all the libraries open, and there was no funding to rehire research librarians, a critical aspect of any library, let alone a state-of-the-art environmental library. Finally, in almost 4 decades of working for EPA, I have never experienced such an unprecedented level of political consideration in the performance of EPA's missions. This political influence threatens the integrity of EPA engineers and scientists and undermines the very mission of the agency and must stop. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of AFG Council 238 and its almost 9,000 engineers, scientists, and staff which we represent. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Grifo.
Good morning. My name is Francesca Grifo, and I'm a senior scientist and director of the Scientific Integrity Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, a leading science-based nonprofit working for a healthy environment and a safer world. Chairman Miller, Congressman Hall, thank you for this opportunity. In 2006, as we've heard, the EPA began to close or reduce access to parts of its network of libraries as part of a modernization plan. This process took items out of circulation before making them available electronically and did not fully consider how to make the diversity of EPA's library holdings accessible during the transition period and beyond. We do not object to modernization per se, rather to the ongoing lack of access to critical library resources, deficiencies in stakeholder consultation, and lack of transparency in the process, and the rapid pace of library closures in contrast to the slow rate of digitization of library holdings. The Scientific Integrity Program works to expose political interference in federal government science and to ensure a federal scientific workforce able to serve the public interest. Together with several eminent scientists, we recently released a statement entitled Scientific Freedom and the Public Good that outlines the conditions needed by federal scientists to do their jobs and serve the public good. Research support systems, such as libraries, are one such necessary condition for a thriving federal scientific enterprise. In order to fulfill its mission to protect human health and the environment, the EPA must rely on up-to-date scientific information as well as historical materials. Despite the increasing availability of information on the Internet, world-class academic and scientific institutions are maintaining and expanding their libraries, with the understanding that they are the bedrock of scholarship and scientific research. Without ease of access to information, the efficiency and accuracy of EPA's determinations are under threat. In the fall of 2006, we mobilized our network of scientists and citizen activists to call Administrator Johnson's office and demand a halt to the closures. UCS activists made nearly 8,000 phone calls. We have continued to monitor the situation and have met twice with EPA's Office of Environmental Information. Despite these meetings, in the 14 months since we stopped phoning Administrator Johnson, we have seen very little progress. Our main concern continues to be that the EPA libraries are a valuable and cost-effective resource for both the agency and the public, and that nearly a year and a half after their closures, the system that currently replaces them is inadequate. We decided to go to the scientists themselves. Approximately 9 months after the closure, we asked the scientists at the EPA what they thought. 555 scientists agreed or strongly agreed that the recent changes and closures in the EPA library system impaired their ability to do their jobs. When we went to the scientists from regions 5, 6, and 7 where the libraries had closed, half the respondents agreed or strongly agreed that library closures impaired their ability to do their jobs. A number of EPA scientists also provided written comments on the closures. One scientist stated, "The library must also be reopened. Since its closure, some journals are just no longer accessible." Another wrote, "EPA program offices use a lot of scientific information. reduced library access is crippling, and there are more comments in my written testimony. These results show that contrary to EPA's claims, the libraries are an important resource for EPA employees, and that desktop subscriptions, digitization, and the interlibrary loan service are an imperfect replacement. Essential resources such as copyrighted reference books and older volumes of scientific journals cannot be reproduced online. Plans for access to data and documentation that came from contractors or form the basis for guidance or determinations are unclear. The interlibrary loan system is slower than visiting a local library and cannot replace librarians, browsing, or the spontaneous informal learning that takes place in a library. Almost a year and a half later, we still do not know the current status of the digitization process, if skeletal reference collections might be restored, how many librarians have been lost and any plans for their replacement, what level of access is available for materials in repositories such as older documents, microfilm, and documents generated by EPA contractors, if there are adequate provisions to ensure access to digitized documents for people with disabilities, the status of the OPPTS chemical library and any plans to digitize those materials, and perhaps most importantly, we don't have a firm deadline for when full, efficient access to needed library resources will be restored. Large problems persist, and no specific timeline for addressing them has been put forth. The Union of Concerned Scientists urges Congress to continue its oversight of the EPA and Administrator Johnson until full access to EPA library materials is restored. Transparency of library decisions, stakeholder consultations, and protections for scientists who publicly raise concerns about the libraries are important issues and are addressed in my written testimony. In conclusion, regardless of the timing and manner of the eventual reopening of portions of the library network, there are three immediate actions that must happen now. The first, a basic reference collection and a librarian should be restored to scientists in Regions 5, 6, and 7, EPA headquarters, and the OPPTS Chemical Library. Second, the EPA must set and meet a firm deadline for completion of the digitization of all EPA documents. And third, the EPA must set and meet a deadline for full public access to all the rest of EPA's informational holdings. We look forward to working with Congress on bipartisan legislation and other reforms to restore scientific integrity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Dr. Grifo, Mr. Rettig.
Chairman Miller, Congressman Hall, thank you for inviting me today to speak on behalf of the American Library Association. My name is Jim Rettig. I am University Librarian at the University of Richmond in Virginia. I am also President-elect of the American Library Association, the oldest and largest library association in the world, with some 66,000 members. The importance of this hearing and the gravity of the situation has caused the American Association of Law Libraries to support my testimony and the stance of the American Library Association. Overall, the key issue to determine is whether or not EPA's library plan is based on users' needs. Our sources have repeatedly told us that EPA has not reached out to the EPA library user community, the thousands of scientists, researchers, and attorneys who use these resources daily, as well as members of the public who have benefited greatly from access to these unique collections. In light of that, I would like to address two issues. First, the vital importance of access to scientific, environmental, legal, and other government information for EPA employees, scientists, and the American public. Second, the necessity for the information specialist, the staff librarian, to ensure the most effective access to this information. Because there are fewer libraries and professional library staff, scientists and the public will have less access to this information. So let me first address the loss of valuable environmental information. As one recently retired EPA librarian described it, the EPA libraries once functioned as a virtual national library for the environment. Because of its networking, both technical and human, and interlibrary loan and reference services, users of any EPA library had access to the collections of all other sites. This cost-effective structure provides wide access for staff and public. Now that some of these regional libraries and the chemical library here in Washington, D.C. are closed, key links have been removed from the chain, weakening the whole. All EPA library users suffer, not just those near closed facilities. Further, the library community is deeply troubled by the dispersing of materials from the closed libraries. What this disbursement entails is not clear. We are concerned about how the dispersed information has been handled, causing long-term damage to EPA's effectiveness and the ability of the American people to find important environmental and government information. Preservation of digital assets is also very important. Without more detailed information about the EPA's digitization project, we cannot assess whether it is digitizing the most appropriate materials, whether there is appropriate metadata and cataloging to make sure that people can access the digital materials, or whether the technology that will be used to host the digital contents meets today's standards. While EPA has met with ALA staff on several occasions to discuss this issue, it has consistently failed to act upon the advice that came as a result of these meetings. This experience with EPA underscores the need for the executive branch to develop and implement effective and consistent approaches for how government agencies undertake digitization of government records and publications and how they provide access to these. The process of library improvements and/or closures, which directly impacts access to these government materials, must be coherent and user-focused with proper planning and oversight of the process. Our second concern is what this means for EPA's information specialists, its librarians. ALA understands that in the 21st century, people can access much of what they need from their own desks. We also understand how complicated and costly the move to digitization can be. But the bottom line is that libraries still need skilled professionals to assist users, to organize Internet access, to determine the best way to make information available to those users, and to assure that digitization projects adhere to standards. Furthermore, traditional library users who are not comfortable with web-based search engines put their trust in a knowledgeable library professional. The EPA's environmental collections are vast and deep, and a search engine just isn't enough. With the loss of the brick-and-mortar facilities comes the loss of the most important asset in the library, the librarian. After all, what good is information if you can't find it? The future clearly calls for a hybrid where not every single item or service is online, nor is everything confined to a physical structure. The hybrid's backbone is the profession of skilled, knowledgeable, and helpful information specialists, librarians. In closing, ALA asks this committee request EPA to discuss with stakeholders how best to meet user needs and plan for the future. Base its actions upon these users' needs. Stabilize and inventory the collections that have been put in storage. Develop and implement a government-wide process to assist agencies to design effective digitization programs, and reestablish the standard that federal government librarians manage federal government libraries. We appreciate your responsiveness and look forward to determining how we can save these collections, assure library service for users, and maximize access to important environmental information for staff, scientists, and the public at large. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the American Library Association. I'll be happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rettig. I understand the reason that we are being summoned to the floor is not a vote, but that at 10:30 there will be a moment of silence for the American servicemen and women who have died in Iraq. Obviously, all of us, Mr. Hall, Ms. Johnson, and I would want to be there for that. So, Ms. O'Neill, I think we can get your testimony in and still have time to get the floor. Ms. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the progress EPA is making on strengthening its national library network and ensuring that the information our employees and the American public need to make sound decisions about the environment is made available to them. Let me begin by saying that I am fully committed to enhancing the EPA National Library Network and providing the broadest possible access to environmental information for EPA staff and the public. As EPA's CIO, I'm very much aware of the opportunities that technology offers us to make more environmental information accessible to an ever-growing number of users, both EPA staff and the public, regardless of their location. However, I also understand that some users need access in more traditional formats, and that our professional librarians play a valuable role in assisting our library users. The network is comprised of 26 libraries and provides multiple methods for delivering information services: walk-in access to collections and assistance, online resources, and interlibrary loans. To ensure that the network was evolving and keeping pace with the newer demands from a growing, diverse customer base, EPA began re-examining its library net model in 2003 to identify new ways to deliver library service and meet customer needs in a cost-effective manner. While EPA implemented changes in the walk-in services in some locations in 2006, we continue to provide a full range of library services to EPA staff and the public. EPA appreciates the thorough review of the Government Accountability Office recently conducted of the EPA library network operations. We recognize the importance of transparency in our library planning processes, and we worked hard to cooperate and assist the GAO during this review. The agency has already taken many steps to address the recommendations made in the GAO review. We placed a 90-day moratorium on any changes at our libraries in mid-December 2006 in response to concern raised by a number of our stakeholders. In late February 2007, this moratorium was extended indefinitely in an effort to work more closely with various concerned groups. Since then, EPA has taken many steps to improve governance and coordination across EPA, enhancing these services. In early 2007, EPA issued an interim National Library Network policy, assigning the overall responsibility of the library network to me, the Assistant Administrator of the Office of Environmental Information. The policy established uniform governance and management for the network, applicable to all headquarters and regional offices that provide library services. To implement the policy, a number of network-level procedures and standards are being developed that will ensure commonality in the way libraries operate across the network. At the same time the policy was issued, EPA hired a highly qualified professional librarian with many years of experience as the Network National Program Manager. The new program manager coordinates all network activities and provides strategic direction in all planning, operations, and outreach efforts. EPA also increased outreach to outside parties on our library operations and plans. We participate in a number of meetings and conferences with professional associations such as ALA, the Special Libraries Association, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. The agency has stepped up coordination with other federal agencies on library operations. My staff is working closely with the Federal Library and Information Center Committee, FLIC, at the Library of Congress on our plans for the future of the network. FLIC has selected a board of advisors composed of federal library managers to work directly with the network to advise us on procedures, operations, and future directions. I want to assure the subcommittee that as EPA implemented improvements to the network, we continue to provide library services to our customers. Customers continue to have access to documents, either in person or via interlibrary loans. They received help in answering reference and research questions, and the agency continues to enhance our offerings available from our digital libraries. EPA employees now have electronic access to more than 120,000 resources from their desktops. Also, we established agreements between several of our libraries and the centers of excellence within the network to allow us to leverage the expertise available from other locations. Users of the services offered via these agreements report high satisfaction with the quality and timeliness of these services. Moving forward, EPA continues to develop a long-range plan for strong and effective library network, and we continue to solicit input from both internal and external customers. In recognition of our goal to provide the service our customers need, we will be conducting a formal needs assessment to inform future planning of the network. Of particular importance is ensuring EPA staff have access to the information they need to do their jobs, and EPA is committed to working collaboratively with EPA staff and union representatives on future changes to the library network that may impact employees. As part of the planning efforts, EPA is currently working on a report to Congress pertaining to EPA's libraries requested in the report language on the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2008. The report language directs EPA to restore the network of EPA libraries recently closed or consolidated and submit a report to the committees on appropriations regarding actions it will take to restore publicly available libraries to provide environmental information and data to each EPA region within 90 days of the enactment. EPA's report will describe the agency's plans to ensure on-site support in each EPA region, the EPA headquarters library, and the Office of Pollution, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances, our chemical library. Finally, EPA is committed to examining ways to provide even greater access to environmental information to meet customers' needs. I believe that all of the agency's information access services, be they through EPA libraries, the EPA website, or other agency mechanisms, are components of a broader canvas that supports our commitment to provide access to environmental information. On behalf of Administrator Johnson, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about our EPA National Library Network and our ongoing efforts to strengthen it to make it a premier environmental library network. I'm happy to address any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. And our questioning will take place after we return from the floor. So you're at ease. Mr. Hall, and what I assume was sincere compliments of my renown as a lawyer, I am reminded that judges in North Carolina, at least, tell juries that they should judge the evidence not by its quantity, but by its quality and convincing force. But Ms. O'Neill, I still cannot help but notice that you are badly outnumbered, that all the other witnesses tell a very different tale. Their testimony is very different from yours. In your testimony, you discussed the future network services that would bring EPA materials to EPA employees and to the public, including the scientists who rely upon the EPA libraries. But your testimony is relatively silent, or soft-spoken, on what is available today, other than to say broadly that EPA continues to provide the full range of library services to EPA staff and the public. And that certainly sounds like there has been no change in the access that the EPA staff has or the public has to EPA's library materials. Is that your testimony?
Well, let me clarify. That is my testimony, but let me clarify. I think the services are there. They may be different in terms of the libraries where we've closed the walk-in service, where there was obviously a physical librarian there. That service is still there in terms of being able to have reference checks and research and obtaining information. They just go through a different mechanism. So where we don't have the physical presence of the library, the EPA staff have a number and a website to go to actually get some services for help. And we have centers of excellence where we have librarians there helping them find information that they need.
And is it your testimony that all the same materials are available that were available before?
I can't testify that all materials are all documents and materials are there that they were there before, but the key unique documents are available to them. The other thing is that we have arrangements with other libraries, so if they were general documents, we have in our libraries we had a lot of general documents, whether they be magazines or something that they can go to a public library, but we tried to ensure that they have as much as there as we possibly can based on the need.
There's been considerable testimony, and I think part of the GAO's findings, that some materials were just thrown away. Did you keep a catalog of what was thrown away?
It is not, to my knowledge, nothing was thrown away. There were some things that were outdated that they went through. We had guidelines for each of, for each of the regional office to have in terms of as they went through the materials in their portfolio of things. It says, listen, if this is a document that's unique, it needs to be tagged for digitization. We also need to make sure it goes and to see if we have a copy in our central repository. Where there were journals where we had other copies in other location, they were tagged for recycling. I don't know of anything that was actually, or we offered those materials up to other libraries first. So there was a whole process that went through this in terms of what to do with the materials that were either duplicative in nature or that no one wanted, or they weren't unique to EPA.
Okay. Mr. Orzehoskie?
Yes, sir. Orzehoskie, but
I
that's
apologize
fine.
for difficulty in your
Everyone in my life has had difficulty with my name.
Well, that's reassuring. I grew up in the South. There was not a lot of ethnic diversity. Everyone kind of came from Northern Europe or from Africa, but had European names, and had done that a long time ago. And so I'm less familiar than some members in dealing with ethnic names, or not Northern European and Western European names. If I don't act as country, it's
you did very well.
It's because until recently I have, or as Southern, it's because until recently I have lived exclusively in North Carolina and have not had to act Southern because I simply was Southern. So I don't have quite the practice in acting Southern.
Well, my son lives in
But some other
Louisiana,
members do,
so
so.
I do I know what you're talking about.
You said that the access to EPA services, or do you agree that access to services and resources have not really changed since the beginning of the fiscal year 2007?
Well, I think at Region 5 they've changed dramatically. Now, I can't, I don't use the library in my current position much as a union person. I have talked to some union members that have had difficulty accessing some information. But the library itself is totally gone. I mean, the area where the library was is an empty room. Even the bookshelves and the materials are gone. And there is no reference librarian in Region 5 that I know of.
All right.
We were told that we could get some information from Cincinnati if we wanted to, but now I hear we can go down the street to our public library and get it. But I don't know how many people will be walking in and out of our offices and going down to the public library on a regular basis.
You could, however, pick up John Grisham's latest there.
Yes.
Ms. O'Neill, you just, in your printed testimony, I think in the answer to the previous question, you said that EPA was developing network standards, procedures to ensure commonality. You were hiring highly qualified professional librarians to coordinate the network, that you'd increased outreach to outside parties, and you were conducting a formal needs assessment to plan for your future service. Did you do all of that before implementing the closures, or is that something you are doing now?
We haven't started the formal needs assessment. That is something that we plan on doing in the near future. It's come out of our working with our with our library network. This is something that our librarians have mentioned that we need to do collectively, and we're committed to doing that. So we've been trying to engage in discussions with our librarians throughout the country on where we need to go, and that's one of the suggestions that came out. That's why I was really glad to hear it in the testimony from two other testimonies here, because that is on our queue to do. In terms of reaching out, I can only speak to say that we did do some outreach, but we've done a lot more in the last year. I can tell you that.
Well, the sense I get from all the other witnesses is that that did, as you've just said, it really began after EPA had already implemented the closures and the cutbacks. Would it not have made sense, a great deal more sense, to do that before implementing the budget reductions and the closings rather than after?
Well, let me just be real clear here, just for the record. I must say that I started EPA in January of 2007. So what I speak about is what I've been told and what I've read about. There was outreach before the closures of the libraries. But I can tell you, since January, there has been additional outreach from the libraries. So I think it's been documented that we didn't do any, and I don't think that that's true. I think that we did do some outreach to different communities in terms of getting some ideas. A lot of the was mentioned earlier about some of the. We started looking at this, I think, back in 2003. And as part of that, we did look at other procedures that were out there from different associations, and we did talk to some of these associations over the course of those years as well.
I assume that all the other witnesses would have been the outreaches.
Well, I know they've never reached out to the union, and I think my testimony reflects that, and that we've had to file grievances and unfair labor practices just to get where we are. And even after getting an arbitrator to agree they should be negotiating with us, they still haven't.
Okay. Mr. Stephenson?
Just think about what was just said by EPA. They're in the process of thinking about doing a needs assessment to determine what their users need right now. Why wouldn't you do that first? That's what their own 2003-2004 study recommended. How can you assess your inventories of materials and decide what you need and don't need and throw anything away or not before you do that? And Ms. O'Neill doesn't know whether they threw out any materials. We don't know whether they threw out any materials because they haven't inventoried their materials to determine what best to do with them. The whole thing is kind of backwards. We're closing libraries first, as I said, and now we're beginning to do the analysis that should have been done in the first place.
The GAO is generally noted for very temperate, qualified, cautious reports.
Fact-based.
If fact-based. I think if Harry Truman wanted to find a one-handed economist, he probably would have certainly wanted to find a one-handed GAO employee, but you seem to be one-handed on this. Ms. Grifo, has been your experience in outreach? I assume that the Union of Concerned Scientists or your members would have been one of the important clients, and what contact did you receive, and what are you receiving now?
We actually didn't receive any prior to our initiation of contact. I mean, it was only after we generated the phone calls and they essentially, called us and begged us to stop, to make the phone call stop so they could use that phone line again, that we actually met with them and began our dialogue. There was nothing ahead of time.
Okay. Mr. Rettig.
The closings brought this to ALA and ALA members' attention, and we've been concerned ever since and remain concerned. There are many resources for planning digitization projects right here within the federal government. The National Science Foundation, Institute for Museum and Library Services, National Endowment for the Humanities have made grants, millions and millions of dollars over the years to develop the standards for digitization in digital libraries.
My time has expired. Mr. Hall is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'm not sure I have any questions. I've been gone. I don't know what's been asked. I hate to be repetitious, but I do know the importance of libraries. And I know that there's some problem here, and I'm not sure what the problem is, but I think this is a good place to work it out and hammer it out and find out what's happened and what ought to happen and how you can make that happen. And I presume that's the chairman's intent, is to get to the bottom of it. Not to set blame or to punish anyone, but how to improve it and make something work. Libraries, the Southern Association, when they go to a university, they're the accrediting entity of state colleges and universities. When they go anywhere to any university to talk about granting them a doctoral program, the very first place they go is to the library, and that's how important it is, and that's how very important probably this hearing is. So I guess the only way I can be helpful, and there's no one here to be helpful but me on this side of the docket, so I'm about the best we got going right now. If libraries have changed over the last 10 or 15 years, that may ought to be some input. If attendance, their use has dropped in recent years, maybe that ought to be talked about. If there's any efforts to engage or not to engage internal EPA constituency like scientists unions or external users of it, maybe that's important, and maybe this chairman's gone into all that. I'm not here, but I might ask Ms. O'Neill, what has EPA done since last year's hearing with the Senate to take steps to rectify whatever the problems are, whether you agree they exist or not?
Since I think the hearing in SCPW was February of 2007, I was there, I believe. And I can't remember, it was before or after that we put it was right around the same time. We put there had been a 90-day moratorium put out in December for making any changes to the library. That includes doing any more recycling or taking the collections away and things like that, going through the criteria to do that. Given where we were and a lot of the concerns that were out there, and quite frankly because we also want to make sure that we're doing things in a way that makes sense and in a direction that's the correct direction. And around February, I don't know the exact date, we put another moratorium out indefinitely, and that has not lifted. So there haven't been any changes since then. So we haven't had any changes in terms of reducing hours or closing any libraries since late 2006. The only thing that we asked them to do is just continue to look at those unique documents so that when we do digitization, that we're ready to do that for those in libraries that hadn't closed. We had already gone through that.
Is that for those that the chairman laid out in his opening statement? Have you addressed those concerns while I've been gone?
In my testimony, I think I tried to tell what we were doing. Right now, we're in the process of finalizing a report to Congress that will put together the plan for how we're going to reestablish the physical libraries in the regions that have closed, as well as in our headquarters and chemical libraries that closed. So we're working very closely with the regions and headquarters to make sure we do that in a way that makes a lot of good sense, and based on what we've learned over the last year as well. And beyond that, we want to make sure that plan addresses the libraries that maybe reduced their hours and made some changes last year that maybe didn't close, but that we established some minimum standards for our entire network.
And have you shared that plan with those that are testifying here?
Not yet. The plan is not due until the end of March. So it's coming, and we're on schedule to deliver that.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd ask unanimous consent for Mr. Sensenbrenner to send whatever questions. He'll read the testimony, and then he'll have some questions. I don't really have any further questions for the witness, and I thank you very much.
Without objection, Mr. Sensenbrenner's questions will be submitted to all of you to answer afterwards. I do disagree with my distinguished colleague about the purpose of oversight hearings. Sometimes it is to place blame. That's one of the things oversight does, is look at what has happened, and when what happened shouldn't have happened, yes, place blame. Criticize harshly what has happened. If there is no consequence to bad conduct, it will happen again and again. I know there are some, Mark McGuire leaps to mind, who say, let's not dwell on the past, let's look to the future. But if we don't look to the past and place blame, if blame is merited, then it will happen again without consequence. I understand that the report will be due the end of March, and you all will be given some opportunity to respond before it is produced. It sounds like you're not going to have very long to respond. How long would you expect, Ms. O'Neill, how much time will the various interested parties, the stakeholders, to use the jargon, have to review the document before it's final? I believe you just said that it was due at the end of March. That's this month, and they hadn't received it yet, but they'd be given an opportunity to comment before it was released. Is that right?
I'd have to check and see what the entire schedule is, but this is.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
I'm sorry. I have to check to see what the schedule is in terms of where we are in our internal review right now, which is where we are right now. We were planning, I know, briefing the union on this. We were waiting for the arbitration hearing to see how things were done, and see also what we need to do in terms of getting this out. But I have to tell you, I mean, internally we've been spending a lot of time trying within our own organization, trying to figure out what we can do in terms of each of these regional areas. They're all different. As many of you mentioned, here in Region 5 we have the libraries physically gone. In Region 7 and 6 we have, so we have to establish a brand new library. In some of the other regions we have different concerns, so we've been spending a lot of time in the places that we've closed to figure out what we can do.
The report to Congress is due at the end of this month, and if you're not talking to the employees of the EPA, if you're not talking to scientists who are the clients of the libraries, if you're not talking to the librarians, who are you talking to?
We are talking to those people. In fact, we have been working with our library network. We've been working with the management. We have internally been working very hard on this, and we've been briefing, I know we're briefing some of these organizations in terms of what the plans are. I'm not sure we've gotten to all of them.
Mr. Orzehoskie, in my opening statement, I said that my understanding was that the abrupt closing and boxing up of materials had hobbled EPA's employees' ability to do their job. Could you, and that was based upon what I understood from your testimony and from others, but could you kind of give us a sense of the practical effect of the closings and reduced services available from the libraries, the practical effect it has on EPA's employees' ability to do their job?
Well, it has it has an array of effects, and I'm not going to profess to be a library expert. I'm a union guy. But I have talked to some of our people, and we had testimony at our arbitration. And the main thing in general is that there's no place to go within EPA Region 5 offices to get library assistance, okay? We are told, and I've talked to some people, and you can get help through Cincinnati over the telephone or through the computer network to get some research. It takes delays now, so when you're doing something that's really timely, those delays can be very critical. If you're going to be testifying at a enforcement hearing the next day or 2 days later, you may not have time to wait to go to a remote location to get your information. I've had people tell me that some of the technical journals that are not necessarily reproducible because they're copyrighted, and some of the technical reference material individuals have actually purchased because they can't wait for delays, and in some cases can't get it digitized anyway. Those kinds of things. And if you saw the picture that was up there of all those boxes, I mean, if you wanted one of the documents in that box, how would you get it?
How would you know where it was?
Exactly.
Dr. Grifo?
I think it's interesting that, you know, we still haven't heard a progress report on the digitization. I mean, we are talking about, okay, these libraries are gone, they're physically not there, and we've talked about the kinds of things that are replacing them. I mean, the desktop libraries, the digitization of some things, and so on, the interlibrary loan system. But I think it's important to understand, and it's this number comes from one of the EPA's own documents, that those things, even when that digitization is complete, even when those documents, those unique documents, which are really all EPA documents, are made available electronically, that's really less than 1% of the holdings of the library. So I think our concern is with all of these other documents. I mean, there are, you know, reference materials, copyrighted materials, older journals. I mean, there's a whole long list of things, particularly, you know, documents produced by contractors, documents produced specifically for guidance, as background for guidance and determinations. I mean, if we think back to the complexity of the mandate of the Environmental Protection Agency, I may not have the number exactly right, but it's something like, you know, 14 pieces of legislation that govern this agency, and many of those have very specific instructions about best available science, science-based information, and how is this to happen if these things, if these very important resources have been essentially in limbo, inaccessible, you know, unreachable, unusable for now going on, what, 17 months? A very long time. How many decisions have been made in that 17 months without the best available science there for them to be used?
Thank you. I know the red light has come on, but Mr. Stephenson, I'd like to give you a chance to address this as well. Your point of view is not that of a stakeholder, but someone who has, I assume, entered upon the question without preconception.
Well, in these cases, we rely on others for their expert opinion, and I think Dr. Grifo mentioned that they did a survey of EPA's own scientists, and they admitted that it impaired their ability to do their job. The federal arbitrator, when he rendered his decision, said that was one of the factors in his decision that EPA's actions affected the employees' abilities to do their job. So you don't have to believe GAO. We didn't have to find anything original. There's all kinds of evidence out there that in fact these documents are in limbo, and whether it's 1% or not, EPA at this point doesn't know what it should digitize and what it should not digitize. Should it make a PDF file out of it? Should it make a searchable file out of it? It hasn't inventoried what it has and gone through the process of determining what makes the most sense for this individual document.
My time has expired. Mr. Hall.
Well, I'm not here as a protector of EPA, nor as an admirer of EPA. I represent a state that's an energy state, and we've had a lot of problems with the EPA and seeking answers to them. And when they wouldn't give us answers, we've sent up amendments to give them 30 days to say yes or no, and not caring whether they said yes or no, but to give us an answer we could appeal from. And that really hasn't worked too well. So, but I want to be fair with the lady that's here to offer her knowledge and of the past and what's present and what they intend to do, and then I guess that's the duty of this chairman and of those of us who are asking you questions, to lay that out and to be helpful to you if we can be, to pull you together and give us instructions. And if your purpose this year is to tell us whether or not we need further legislation, what to do about the future. And I haven't heard anybody make any suggestions on that, but I haven't been here, so you might have made your suggestions. But I found EPA hard to deal with, and I wouldn't take an appointment as administrator of EPA if it paid $10 million a year, because there's no way in the world you can do your job. If you do what Congress tells you to do, you're going to get sued, and if you don't, you're going to get sued. So it's a tough situation. I think they could be better in answering and giving definite answers, and not stall anybody that wants to build a $100 million refinery when gas prices are going to $4. When they want an approval of a request for a permit, and just not to act on it, because you can't appeal when a no action. You have to have either a turn down or an approval. And we set it up to where if they made it, and I think it's in the Energy Act a year and a half ago, had an amendment there that said if we made a request, or industry made a request to build or to upgrade a refinery, that they'd have 30 days, EPA would have 30 days to answer that, not caring if they said yes or no, because you can appeal from what they do. You can't appeal from nothing. And somehow EPA was strong enough to knock that out. We didn't get that in that act. But I'm not here to uphold EPA, but to be fair with Ms. O'Neill and give her a chance to answer any questions that you all have set up. And Mr. Sensenbrenner will look at the information that will go of record. The chairman will see that all of your testimony goes into the record, and your presentation that you read from initially. And he'll have some questions. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything further to say. I yield back my time, and I thank you for it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Ms. O'Neill, I have a few more questions about the report that will be due in just a couple of weeks that you spoke about a minute or two ago. Who precisely is participating in preparing the report?
Excuse me. We've been working with our, in OEI, which obviously we take the lead. Our Office of Environmental Information takes the lead to do the response. So we are working closely with our library network, as well as that's our network of libraries for the 20-some libraries, as well as the regions and the headquarters and the chemical library that are affected with this.
Well, I think my question, what I'm trying to get at, is exactly which EPA employees are preparing the report, doing the work and putting it together.
There are people from my staff, and I'm not sure if who's actually writing it beyond that in terms of the library network. They've written parts of it, but a lot of my staff are.
So it is your office that is preparing it?
That's correct.
Okay. And it will be ready in 2 weeks, or?
Yes.
17 days?
Yes, we will be responsive.
Okay. And to whom are you submitting it for review before it is released?
I believe and I apologize for not knowing the full process here. It's the first time I've had to do an appropriations response. So I know right now it's an internal review with our Office of Financial, our financial officer right now, just to make sure it's an appropriations request to see if we've fully answered the questions.
About OMB?
I don't know. I'm assuming it's going.
You're assuming?
It's going.
That OMB will see
I don't know for a fact.
Okay. A moment ago, Ms. O'Neill said that stakeholders were being briefed in advance. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, I believe we talked about this yesterday in one of my briefings, that we were going to reach out to, if we had time, obviously, if we had an opportunity to reach out to if there's a union meeting set up or something, to reach out and talk to the unions, because we talked about, when the arbitration hearing came down, what we can do in terms of telling them what was going to be in the plan. Beyond that, quite frankly, I'll have to get back to you on specifically who else we've reached out to, external to EPA. Mr.
Orzehoskie, have you been briefed, or do you know if the UFGE has been briefed or consulted in any way?
As far as I know, AFGE has not been. I know I personally have not.
All right.
And I think that's part of my concern. She said that we have time. You know, we went to arbitration. We have a federal arbitrator say they're supposed to negotiate with us, and she says if they have time, they might talk to us.
Well, and that time would come in the next 2 weeks. Ms. O'Neill said if there was a meeting already scheduled, they might come. Could you schedule a meeting just for this?
Well, certainly.
All right. I thought you might be able to work that into your schedule. How about Ms. Grifo? Has Union Concerned Scientists or scientists individually been consulted, briefed that you know of?
Not to my knowledge, but we would be happy to set up a meeting on a moment's notice almost.
Right. Well, it sounds like that's what you'll get.
That's okay.
You might want to clear your calendar for March 30th and 31st.
Good enough.
Mr. Rettig, how about you? How about the librarians?
The ALA Washington office staff would be the contact for that, and they have not informed me of any such discussions to date.
Would you expect that they would?
We certainly hope so, and we'd be very willing to enter into dialogue.
Okay. But would you expect that the Washington office would have told you, would have mentioned it to you?
I don't know how many times I've spoken with staff of the Washington office this week. It would have come up then, I'm sure.
Okay. It seems like something that might come up, but particularly since you were testifying today. And you might want to suggest to the librarians that they keep the 30th and 31st of March free as well for consultation before the report is released. All right. Mr. Rettig, I know I asked Mr. Orzehoskie and Ms. Grifo about the how the day-to-day work of EPA employees and scientists was affected by the closing and limiting of the libraries, but how is the loss of librarians? What role do they play, and how does that affect employee effectiveness and the effectiveness for scientists in doing their research?
Librarians bring an added value to any organization that operates on information. Not every scientist can know where all the information that might be relevant to his or her work is available. This is what librarians specialize in. This is what we do. We help connect people to that relevant information that they can use. This is not something that one picks up just from day-to-day experience. It requires education and study, and we believe that it's essential that if a federal agency is going to call something a library, that it be managed by librarians.
Okay. Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson was here earlier but was not able to come back after the moment of silence. But she is particularly interested in the Dallas, Texas. We're all proudly parochial in our jobs in the House. That is our job. And the regional library there, of course, was closed. The public, in addition to the EPA employees in that region, relied on that office, as did the public. What are you all doing to reach out specifically to the people in the regions where the libraries are closed, and most specifically to Dallas? Or should they be available on March 30th, 31st
No,
for consultation?
No, we've been working with the regions, as I mentioned, over the past 2 months in terms of what the needs are, in terms of reestablishing the physical presence. Dallas is one of those regions that we're working with.
Who precisely have you talked to?
I'd have to get back to you on the exact names, but I'm sure we've been coordinating through the ARA, the Assistant Regional Administrator, and the staff there.
Okay, and they have been talking to members of the public who use that library?
I can't answer that question for the record.
Okay. I don't even know what we're about. We are obviously being called to the floor for something. Paul, do you have any questions at this point?
Ask one question. Mr. O'Neill, is there anything that we haven't asked you that you'd like for us to ask you to where you can give us the full information that you have for these 4 people that are sitting by you there?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Just, we've talked a little bit, and I recognize that we don't have a lot of time here about the plan that's coming out to reestablish the physical presence in the actual regions and headquarters in the chemical library that have closed. I also want to just say for the record, one of the things that we're doing, because we have been listening to people, we spent a lot of time in the last year reaching out to people, is that beyond that, we're actually looking at establishing some minimum standards for those libraries that have remained open, but to make sure everyone is on the same, has the same amount of good quality service, that we have standard hours in place and things like that. So we really have gone out and listened in terms of some of the things that people are concerned about. So the report will also address that as well.
And is your deadline for support set by someone above and within the EPA, or is that congressional, or who sets that deadline that you're trying to meet?
There's a congressional deadline, actually. I believe it's the 26th, so the time would be before that, Mr. Chairman.
And that's said, you intend to comply with that?
We have to comply with that. But I will say, even after the report is written, we do plan on meeting with a lot of folks outside to get the details of the plan, to make sure that, because some of these, as I've mentioned, each region is in a different is in a different place right now. So we have to really work through some of the details in terms of build-outs, what the requirements are going to be for each of these libraries and things like that. We've got a very good idea of what those things are, but we can certainly have some of these other folks that are interested in working with us identify some of the details to that. But
you seek any of their advice on when you're writing out your report? It seems like Mr. Rettig would be a great source for you.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we've been very, very busy internally making sure that we can meet our commitment, okay, both from a financial standpoint. One of the things we don't want to do, quite frankly, is reestablish these libraries and then not have the commitment to make sure that they continue beyond next year. And so one of the things we've been really working with is to make sure there's a commitment financially as well, to make sure that we open them and that they stay open, meeting the requirements that we're putting in place.
And I can't see Charlie's last name, but he represents an awful lot of people that are looking to him to represent them and to give them advice. And would he not be a good reference for you, someone to work with?
Yes, he would, sir.
I'll yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We do have a few more minutes because the vote will be a procedural vote, and it usually is left open for a while. Ms. O'Neill, I have a few questions that are not essay questions or even short answer questions that really are true-false questions, or yes or no questions. Will the EPA reopen the 3 closed regional libraries this fiscal year?
Yes.
That is your commitment?
Yes.
Will you reopen the headquarters library this fiscal year?
Yes.
That is your commitment?
Yes.
Will the EPA reopen the chemical library this fiscal year?
Yes.
And that is your commitment?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Stephenson, again, thank you for the GAO's report, for your work on this. It certainly sounds like there may be the occasion for more work. Will the GAO be ready to assess what happens from this point forward?
We respond to all requests.
Well, I appreciate that you will respond. I hope the response will be yes, you will do the report, additional report. All right. Thank you all for appearing. We do need to go for votes. And I think that we don't really have time for closing statements, but I think we've all made our views pretty well known. So thank you for appearing, and this may not be the last time. And under the rules of the committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements and any additional questions, including from Mr. Sensenbrenner, that they might have for the witnesses. And I ask all of you to enter a packet. I ask now for unanimous consent to enter a packet of materials in the record. Hearing no objection, the materials will be entered in the record, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.